Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. So Ukraine War news update, third part thereof for the 7th of May 2024. This is a geopolitical video for you. I'll talk a little bit about that topic in general at the end. Right, we're going to start with the EU planning, and this should have been in my previous video on military aid and sort of monies going into Ukraine and supporting Ukraine, but this just came out after, or at least I came across it after I compiled that video. The EU plans to send 90% of revenues from frozen Russian assets to Ukraine. The EU countries have agreed to allocate 90% of revenues from frozen Russian assets to Ukraine's defense. This was announced by German Chancellor Olaf Scholz at a news press conference in Riga. According to him, the profit from Russia's frozen assets frozen in response to its invasion of Ukraine amounts to several billion euros a year. Scholz noted that an agreement is already at the final stage. This is really good news. We heard about that. It's interesting to see how much it's going to be. Some people talk about 5 billion a year, but it says several billions there. And 90% of 5 billion would be certainly useful because that's a sustainable amount that's going each year. And that will be straight for defense, I think. So rather, unlike, say, the US defense, the US military aid, the US supplemental to Ukraine, which is 61 billion, but you're thinking, well, how much actually is in physical aid to Ukraine? And it depends how you value that equipment. It depends how it's all sliced and diced with regard to, well, is that replenishment for US stocks? Is that taken from stocks? Is it ordered from new contracts, etc., etc.? And we kind of worked out that somewhere between 20 and 25 billion was what was military aid to Ukraine. And even that's, confused by some of those ideas. But 20 to 25 billion is military aid to Ukraine. The rest is other kind of monies doing other kinds of things, supporting either the US stocks or humanitarian financial aid, oversight, all sorts of stuff that make up the rest of that. But this looks like it'll be this is just for military aid. Yeah, I know it's a lot smaller than that, but if you can get something like $4 billion a year of military aid support to Ukraine, then that's fantastic. I mean, that's like just from frozen Russian assets, and not even from the assets themselves, but from the profits that they make. That's like, 4 brand new Patriot batteries a year plus a bunch of missiles. Do you know what that's like? Yeah, we'll take that. We'll take that. We'll take that. And imagine, if they've been using those, I wonder if they will be able to use the profits that have been generated since they have frozen those assets. So yes, it might be several $billion worth a year. What about 2022's and 2023's frozen assets profits? Could that now be sort of $6 to $10 billion they've got right now to be able to spend? That's a question I'd like answered. On this note, the European Union has proposed a plan to use the profits. The proposal is set to be discussed by EU envoys with the hope of reaching a deal to unlock funding for Ukraine. Countries that oppose military aid, such as Hungary, Slovakia, Austria, Malta, Cyprus and Ireland, can choose to provide humanitarian assistance instead. So there's this option for neutral countries to provide non-military aid out of that. But that's still, really useful for Ukraine, obviously. Now, Italy's defense minister has said on Monday that economic sanctions against Russia have failed, and he called on the West to try harder to negotiate a diplomatic solution with Putin to end the war in Ukraine, which is really odd messaging from Italy's defense minister, because he just previously said that we should do everything we can to help Ukraine, short of sending Italian soldiers to Ukraine. So it's like, that was his statement on the whole Macron, don't take it off the table, the ability to at least threaten to send troops to Ukraine. His Italian defense minister was like, no, that's not cool, but we should be helping as much as possible. And then it's like, yeah, no, we need to do a deal. That's how I read that. It seems to be inconsistent messaging there from Italy. Andriy Yermak has said that Ukraine aims to finalise a security agreement with the US in May. That's going to be pretty important. I'd love to see what that entails. A Ukrainian team led by the head of presidential office, Andriy Yermak, held the fourth round of negotiations with the US on a future bilateral agreement on the 6th. Quote, we need to speed up the process to finalise a bilateral security agreement this month, Andriy Yermak said. And then there's also the fact that they are in talks with Belgium for another bilateral security agreement. So they're doing a really good job of going around getting all these bilateral security agreements, which mean I would think that even if some peace initiative did come about and they were either forced into or decided to go into some kind of negotiation with Russia, if Russia wanted a second bite of the apple, or actually it's like third, fifth bite of the apple, then all of these security negotiations will then kick in that I presume are designed to deter Russia from doing that. So Putin has taken office for the fifth time today officially. It's the inauguration. Of course, many nations didn't send any delegates to support that. So here, Estonia will not attend, as is the case with most European nations didn't. France, as I mentioned earlier, France, Greece, Cyprus, Malta, Slovakia, and Hungary sent delegates. But yeah, that's what he's done that's what he's up to today. Bloomberg reports that, quote, Russians are learning to live with the war that Vladimir Putin has unleashed in Ukraine. This is that idea of lobsters boiling in a pot, that if you said to Russians, right, tomorrow we're going to take away this liberty, this liberty, this liberty, this liberty, these state media, these free press and media outlets will disappear, you won't get as much welfare as this, you won't get this spent on hospitals, you won't get this, blah blah blah, all of that money is going to be spent on the war, you're going to have this many people dead, which is just killed tomorrow, the same amount that died in the war, etc., etc. All of the ramifications of going to war for 2 years in Ukraine. If you'd say, right, we're going to have that tomorrow, the Russians would be like, not on your nelly, mate, that ain't going to happen. But you take each of those things over the course of 2 years, and that lobster slowly boils in a pot. And they think, oh, this is fine, this is nice and warm, this is nice and warm, this is nice and warm, oh dear, I boiled to death. And yeah, but what happens is these get normalized, they get used to each subsequent higher degree of temperature, and it just becomes the norm, right? As Putin prepares to be sworn in on Tuesday for another 6 years as president, the invasion has become part of everyday life for many Russians, confounding expectations that the pressure of international sanctions and deepening isolation would eventually turn them against him. Far from protesting, many are rallying around a flag. And the problem is those who have protested have got out of Dodge, and that's exactly what Putin wanted. He said, I'd rather you not here, for actually pretty sensible reasons, rather than trying to convince them around or punish them or, keep them under the yoke. Say, yeah, do one, guys, do one. Yeah, it's going to be a bit of a demographic challenge for us as we have a brain. It's not just an exodus of particularly qualified people, but it's just generally men of a certain age that gives them this labour shortage across the board. But he's like, I'd rather have that than you guys making a mess of things back at home. The Kremlin is using Europe's biggest conflict since World War II to reshape Russia, combining strident nationalism involving a potent mix of Soviet era and imperial nostalgia with an intensifying crackdown on dissent. Something else I saw about this was it showed like these kind of statue things or installations around cities of like the old Soviet style with a Z on, and all of it was this idea that Russia has slowly become remilitarized, right? Like socially, culturally remilitarized. So the idea that the Z symbol is so prevalent, and the George stripes, those orange and black stripes, and all of this symbology is around, and that there's this recognition that war is the kind of central component of what Russia now is, and all of these ideas that have infiltrated into popular culture, if you like, or into installations around cities, that is just this reflection that there is a remilitarization of Russia as a whole. Kiev Independent reports that Germany temporarily recalled its ambassador from Moscow on May the 6th after Berlin accused Russia of launching cyber attacks, Reuters reported, citing a German foreign ministry spokesperson. This is really important. So the ambassador leaving from Moscow, going back to Berlin, is quite a big thing, right? That is a big thing. That Russia has cyber attacked Germany in 2023, attacked the SDP, the Social Democrat Party there, is, I think, a sign of worsening relationships between a country that is a little bit goes both ways with Russia. So you've got the AfD and other elements, particularly in eastern Germany, that have this closer history with Russia, and there is still these elements of Russian sympathies. But the more that Russia does things like cyber attacks that can be linked back to Russia on Germany, the more that they will lose those sympathies, I think, arguably. And so this is what I talked about yesterday. And if Germany's going to recall their ambassador, and if Russia continue to make these sorts of threats that I'm going to talk about in a second, then actually you are going to get this more obvious recognition within Europe that Russia are the bad guys and that we all need to pull together to unify against a common enemy. And actually that's quite a useful thing for unifying people. I've often talked about how the one thing that will unify the earth is that if we had an alien attack. I'm not, I'm talking from a psychological point of view. Like there's nothing better for you. Put aside all your problems that you have. Like it's the same with the nations. Like if you go to war, you unify behind it, and that's why you have the rally around a flag effect. So everyone rallies around a flag, and you rally around your leader as well. You look at what happened with Bush in 9/11. You look at what happened with Margaret Thatcher in 1982 with the Falklands War. She was going to tank in the polls. I'm not saying she went to war because of that, but the effect of going to war in the Falklands was that she was, and that we prevailed, was that she was deeply popular at that point. And so the rally around the flag is a really important phenomenon. If Europe more generally recognizes Russia as the bad guys, then that will act as a unifier. Russia needs to play that game very carefully with sowing discontent amongst Europe, because if it can be too obviously linked back to Russia and they can be seen as the nefarious state actors that they really are, then actually that can backfire and people can unify against Russia. So speaking of which, Putin has just threatened strikes on UK. Now, UK is one of those interesting countries where we generally don't like Russia, and we've never really liked Russia. We don't have the history that Eastern Europe has. We don't have the history that that Germany has, that the Nordic states have. By point of fact that we have never been geographically right next to Russia and have never been part of the Russian Empire or whatever, or the Soviet Union, etc., etc. And so, rather like the US, we see Russia quite obviously as traditionally an enemy, as in through the Cold War years, and that's how America saw them. But now America's had this weird morphing where there's a proportion of society that is liking that. I don't know. I saw another analysis about seeing Putin as that, having elements of traditional Orthodox Christianity and social conservatism and those kind of elements that attract people to that. It's never really been a thing in the UK, predominantly because we're not a very religious country. And I mean that demographically. Although we've got the Queen as a head of state and also the head of the Church of England, and we don't have a separation of church and state in the UK, like you do in the States, not American, like they do in the States. They are technically a secular country, but are very religious in comparison to the UK, that is a very irreligious country or religiously apathetic country. And I mean that by looking at British social social survey. BSS, no, anyway, not our census. Our census also shows that there's a massive growth towards secularism or non-religion. But years ago it was like 52% non-religious, and it's grown since then. In the British Social Attitude Survey. Thank you. So my point being that we won't have many people in the UK that will look at Putin and go, "Oh, we like elements of that," because actually that doesn't really talk to the UK sense of the importance of religion, because we are apathetic in the main, and we're not big on church attendance and etc. etc. So that element doesn't appeal. So we have remained. I think that might go a long way to explaining why we have remained staunchly pro-Ukraine and very much against Russia. We don't have the interest in Russia. We don't have the historical connections, and nothing about Russia really talks to us here. Nothing about what Putin is trying to do is going to flick any switches for most people in the UK. So we have got bipartisan support for Ukraine, and we think they suck, which is why we think Russia suck, which is why Putin can much more obviously say the UK suck. And we've got Litvinenko and Sergei, we've got Skripal and Litvinenko. And Litvinenko was killed in London. Skripal was attempted to be murdered, and his daughter in Salisbury, and other people died as a result of that. So they have gone out their way, the Russians, to assassinate people on our soil, and they don't particularly seem to care. And that's kind of where we're at. So this is why you see often the UK being blamed for things, I think, as well, is because it's kind of like, well, there's no point in us trying to appeal to the British sense of whatever. No point trying to get any of the British population on our side, because it just ain't going to happen. So they can just be our fall guys for everything. So you end up seeing the British get blamed quite a lot for like naval drones attacking Russian ships and this and that. So, it's a British fault, it's a British fault. And we're often not really, or at least wholly, responsible for those things. Here, Putin has threatened strikes on the UK. Ambassadors of both France and Britain were officially threatened today in Moscow. France are in a similar position there, by the way, in pretty much everything I just said. France would also fit the British mold compared to the American mold, which is, as I say, a little bit funky, and then the rest of Europe, particularly Eastern Europe. So that's why I think Macron can come out and say things that he does, and that's why I think the British leaders can come out and say things that are so strongly against Russia. So this is a translation, Google translation here. The ambassador was told that the Russian side views David Cameron's words. So this is the idea that you can use our weapons into Russia. We're not taking troops off the table, that kind of thing. Evidence of a serious escalation and confirmation of London's increasing involvement in military operations on the side of Kyiv. And Casey was warned that the response to Ukrainian strikes using British weapons on Russian territory could be any military installations and equipment of Great Britain, threatening to hit our equipment and installations on the territory of Ukraine and beyond its borders. In other words, anywhere in the world. The ambassador was called upon to think about the inevitable catastrophic consequences of such hostile steps by London, and to immediately refute in a most decisive and unambiguous manner the bellicose, provocative statements of the head of the Foreign Office. And Britain is basically going to say back to that bothered type thing, as in, yeah, no, it's not going to happen. We are not going to do what you are demanding we do. But I mean, this is pretty hardcore. So Russia's threatened military and orders, threatens the UK's military and orders nuclear drills after provocation. So this is then in line with them saying, so the Russians saying, as I reported yesterday, that 2 days ago, that they're going to do these nuclear drills. And it is kind of in response to this escalation. Now, some people are saying this is a slightly different scenario than we have seen previously. So when I talked about all these red lines being reached and then tentatively crossed, and then Russia does nothing, and so we push on to the next one: N777s, HIMARS, main battle tanks, cruise missiles, F-16s. Red line, red line, red line, red line, nothing happens. But then there was this idea of our weapons can be used into Russia and so on and so forth. And actually starting to do nuclear drills is, some people have said, actually a little bit of an escalation. Russia really are doing something, and they really are pushing that envelope. And therefore, should we be more properly kind of scared? Should we be seeing this in terms of a proper escalatory sequence of events? So the Guardian reported yesterday Russia's threatened to strike British military facilities and order its military to hold battlefield nuclear weapons drills in a move the Kremlin described as a response to comments from French President Emmanuel Macron on Western troops fighting in Ukraine and from the British Foreign Secretary David Cameron on using British supplied weapons against Russia. Russian Defense Ministry said in a statement that troops from the Southern Military District would, quote, practice the issues of preparation and use of non-strategic nuclear weapons in response to provocative statements and threats by certain Western officials against the Russian Federation. Now, there's a couple of interesting points about this, and the ISW have done some analysis on this. George Barris, I think on Times Radio recently, was saying that actually, if they're going to be doing drills on the use of tactical nuclear weapons, the Russians are no longer able to use tactical nuclear weapons on a battlefield. Their own troops have been so degraded, and the BMPs that were built as anti-radiation. So the BMPs, the infantry fighting vehicles that the Russians made, were made for the use of tactical nukes on the battlefield because they have these anti-radiation capabilities, and you would blitz the enemy and then go through the IFVs and do what you need to do and be protected from the radiation. They are no longer able to do that. They just simply don't have the equipment to do that. And the equipment they do have is itself degraded to the point that it would not offer the protections on the battlefield that they were designed to give. And so it's interesting that this is potentially an empty threat, even though someone like, I don't know, Jake Sullivan might look at it and go, whoa. So there's lots to think about here. And I would dismiss this, although it's always dangerous to dismiss the threat of nuclear war, but they can do this all the time. They do this all the time, and it's their only card that they have to play to stop anyone. It's what gives Russia the ability to go around the world, invade other countries, and the rest of the world go, oh, okay, you can have that country. While, Iran or somewhere else does that, and we go, no, we're going to have you because you don't have nukes. So the ability to hold nuclear missiles is a message to anyone around the world that it gives you the ability to invade people with impunity. And that's really dangerous. So we have to stand up strongly to that, because otherwise bullies can just do what they like. And the thing is, since nuclear weapons have come on the scene, Britain, for example, as a nuclear nation, hasn't gone and done that. We used to do that. When we had the technological advancements, it was kind of, there's a parallel, but we did go around the world sticking our flags in other countries and exploiting them. And the British Empire came out of that. And that's now why we are like the 5th, 6th biggest economy in the world, largely on the basis of colonialism, right? Britain wouldn't be that just if it had sat on its own, isolated as an island, and not had the depth and breadth of the British Empire to draw strength from in terms of natural resources, which then fueled the Industrial Revolution that predominantly started in the UK. And we used infantry industry protectionism and all sorts of stuff to allow us to become who we are now. And then we go, hey, that is in a sense the same kind of calculation, which is we can go around bullying the world because we can, and no one can stand up to us. Now, nuclear missiles can sort of do that for you as well. So Russia can say, we can go into Chechnya, we can go into Georgia, we can go into Ukraine, and you guys are going to be scared to do anything about that because we've got nukes and we are mental enough to use them. You guys have got nukes as well. A few of you guys have got nukes, but you're a bit more stable and you have a democracy. That means your electorate won't like that and you'll get voted out because you're going around the world threatening people with nuclear missiles. We don't have a democracy. We pretend we do, but clearly we don't. And I can do what I like, says Putin. And there you go. Anyway, that's my geopolitical rant over. Now, John Kirby has said, in order to protect its troops from being hit by Western-made weapons, in other words, in answer to the idea that Britain could use its missiles into Russia, I'll tell you what, in order to protect your troops from doing that, rather than threaten to use nuclear missiles, I'll tell you what you do, says John Kirby. Russia should simply withdraw them from the territory of Ukraine. Absolutely bang on, mate. And you're absolutely right, Russia. Stop whinging about what other people are doing. Have a look in the mirror and see what you're doing, and maybe change your behaviour. You moral monsters. So, the EU is set to ban its countries from using the Bank of Russia's messaging system, which replaced SWIFT. SWIFT is the ability to message and send money really easily between financial entities, and it's what makes the capitalist world go round. And at the beginning of the war, this was removed from able to, so that removed for the Russian financial entities, or many of them, so that they couldn't participate in the global financial infrastructure. And they then have developed their alternative to that, and that is going to be sanctioned in the 14th package of sanctions, which means that if you are a financial entity that is going to then say, okay, we cut through sanctions, we can't use SWIFT to work with you, but we can use that new Russian one you've got, and money can still go each way. Well, then actually, no, if you're going to do that, matey, that system is now sanctioned, and we will penalise you if you, as a Western entity, uses their system to communicate. And so hopefully that will mean that Russia will be hamstrung again. Good news for Hungary's democracy, or what's left of it. Hopefully, Peter Magyar, who is this guy that used to be associated with the Fidesz party, who used to be in the Fidesz party, then went out of it, and then his wife is still involved. He's no longer with his wife, but he's got a recording of his wife basically talking about corruption within the party that went down an absolute storm recently. And it is obvious that Viktor Orban and his party are deeply, deeply corrupt. So anyway, he's going around giving rallies to lots and lots of people, and it looks like there is some pretty significant support for this guy. He's now the Hungarian opposition and anti-Orban Tidza party leader, and he's given a speech about the war in front of tens of thousands of Hungarian protesters in the middle of the Orban regime stronghold countryside town of Debrecen. And he got a big applause. So he says here, the aggressor is Putin. He started the war. Ukraine's fight to defend its territory is legit. The Tidza party urges to begin the peace talks. He says, who vote for the Tidza, vote for the peace. Now, although that sounds like appeasement, he's got to play that very carefully with his electorate. You go too far one side, and you want to attract a lot of people from the Fidesz party. So I wouldn't necessarily say that is a pro-appeasement, pro-Putin kind of view in a way that it would if it came from someone like Orban. It's just he's got to carefully catch up, but he's someone we are going to need to look out for. Right, we're going to move on to China now for super important reasons. We welcome the commitment of Chinese authorities to refrain from selling the weapons or aid to Russia and to strictly control the export of dual-use goods, Emmanuel Macron said after face-to-face talks with Xi Jinping. So remember, Xi Jinping's in the EU, he was in France, now he's going to go Hungary and Serbia. Macron also thanked Xi for the moment of coordination ahead of Putin's visit to China. Macron mentioned the Peace Forum in Switzerland and said he and Xi had decided to, quote, contribute to efforts aimed at achieving peace. So lots of people sort of wondering exactly what's been going on with these talks, and what Xi Jinping's agenda really is. Quote, we welcome commitments, as mentioned. That's that same quote. The Chinese president is against, quote, using the crisis in Ukraine to, quote, blame a third country, blacken its image and incite a new Cold War. In other words, he doesn't want the crisis in Ukraine to be used against China. Well, there's one way of stopping that from happening. Don't help Russia so much. Xi Jinping appeals to Ukraine and Russia to resolve their war diplomatically. He believes that negotiations are necessary. They would become about much quicker if you didn't supply so much help to Russia so that they could continue to prosecute the war against Ukraine. So, yeah. Right, China is... Yes, well, what's it done? This is big, big news. So 270,000 UK forces records thought to have been exposed to Chinese hackers. Payroll data at risk includes names, bank details, and addresses of current and former force members, government sources suggest. So a big Guardian article yesterday. We'll look at some of the details and go on to see what we presently know. So an estimated 270,000 payroll records belonging to nearly all members of Britain's armed forces have been exposed to Chinese hackers at the breach. A third-party contractor was discovered a few days ago. The data at risk includes bank names and bank details, and in a few thousand instances, addresses and national insurance numbers of current and recently departed members of the Army, Navy and Air Force and reservists, government sources indicated. There's no immediate evidence that any data has been stolen or interfered with, but inquiries are continuing. Personnel are affected to be offered credit checks so people can monitor if their bank details have been used without permission. Grant Shapps, the UK's Defence Secretary, is expected to brief MPs today, this afternoon, on the situation and the steps being taken by the MOD to deal with the problem. Hackers are believed to have been present in the system for some time, possibly weeks. Right, so Yahoo News here reporting on this, saying, as the Guardian said, estimated 270,000 records have been exposed. What we know: cyber attack was carried out on a third-party payroll system on a database continuing details of armed forces personnel, containing details of armed forces personnel. The hack potentially compromises the bank details of all serving personnel and some veterans. A very small number of addresses have been accessed. The MOD took the external network operated by a contractor offline, and it's understood the initial investigations have found no evidence that data has been removed. However, affected service personnel will be alerted as a precaution and provided with specialist advice. They'll be able to use personal data protection service to check whether their information is being used or an attempt is being made to use it. Okay, so so on and so forth. The question is, although the culprit has not been established formally, but both Sky News and BBC have reported that the government suspects China of carrying out the attack. And of course, with these kind of cyber warfare moves, it's all about plausible deniability. So unless you can definitely prove it is, in this case, China, then you're left not really being able to do anything formal in response to China. And it's kind of like in a court of law, you can't just imprison someone just on suspicions. You have to go through and kind of prove beyond reasonable doubt that they did it. Well, without being able to do that in some kind of international court, this is just going to be probably one of those things where another nation can attack a nation with cyber warfare and get away with it. It's a bit like dropping bombs on a nation, but no one quite knowing where those bombs came from. You think those planes came from China, but we're not really sure, so we can't really bomb China back or sanction them or do this or do that, but we're kind of 90% sure it is. What do you do? And this, again, it's this idea of is cyber warfare? Is this enough to go to town against China? What do we do about this? I think it's a real challenge. European Union is ready to take tough trade measures against China, said European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. China must provide, quote, fair access to its markets. Otherwise, the EU is ready to use all available tools to protect the economy, she said. This is interesting. So this isn't to do with cyber warfare, but if I understand this might be an economic argument, which is to say we've got a free trade block here that you can access, but we can't access your billion people in the same way that you can access ours, economically speaking. That's unfair. So unless you open up, because people forget that the EU really is a neoliberal enterprise with a moral component of regulation, but it is an economic project. People in the whole Brexit, I've done this before, but in the whole Brexit thing, people are arguing against the straw man and what they thought the EU was. Oh, these rules coming from the EU and all this and all that. I mean, actually, it's trying to be a rule-less, frictionless trade bloc. The only reason you get free movement of people is for economic reasons. You want free movement of capital, products, and labour, etc., etc. So you've got your 4 pillars of free movement of all these things because you want it to be a frictionless trade environment. So if you have that, and then China is somehow more able to take advantage of that than you are of China, then that is a real asymmetry that needs to be sorted out. And so here the EU is maybe getting tough. And if we get tough on China economically speaking, will that help us to have leverage in terms of these kind of cyber warfare elements and so on and so forth? So yeah, lots to be discussed around those ideas. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Actually, before I go, I do want to say this. So people have a go at me quite often. People on Twitter have big goes at me for saying things in my geopolitics video. Here's an example from someone that's almost certainly a Russian troll. From Jay, just Jay. You have a limited grasp of US politics and should make clear that your opinions are those of only recently interested observer who knows very little on the subject. I mean, I was employed as a political journalist for a US media organisation to write on politics and US politics. And I've been writing on it for, 15 years. But apparently I'm only recently interested. Presenting yourself as some sort of expert is a bit cringy, to be honest. Better stay in your lane. I just had a go at him and said, yeah, do you know what? Stay out of my lane. There is this question about what is an expert? When we look at a reporter or a news anchor on TV, are they an economics expert? Are they a political expert? Or are they a journalist that has now spent a long time thinking about politics to the point where they have opinions on politics that other people take seriously? I don't profess to be anything other than some dude on the internet talking about stuff that I find interesting. But what I will not do is kowtow to people that tell me to shut up, because, and this is a good faith statement here from John de Vries here. It says, I was born in the Netherlands, I'm Dutch way of thinking, but I've also lived in USA, Mexico, blah, 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 all these places. I really like your part 1 and part 2. However, your part 3 global political segment is 50-50 benefit for me. I've either fast forwarding it or even ignoring many of these segments. You're covering them with too many political opinions. So, and he says, basically, just stop it. I'd like to have a go out and have a pint with you, but just stop talking geopolitics so much, and infusing it with your own opinions. The problem is, if you do geopolitics and just say, he said this, she said this, right, that's the end of the video, then everyone's like, well, yeah, I could have read that in a freaking newspaper, or like, yeah, there's just a completely factual regurgitation of what is happening on a really prima facie veneer level. Gives you is vacuous. I find this, so I know people in the UK claim the BBC is too left if you're on the right wing and too right if you're on the left wing. Actually, interestingly, if you look at all their political commentators and editors, Nick Robinson, Laura Kunsberg, etc., Humphreys, they're all like actually conservatives. Nick Robinson, political editor for the BBC, was the conservative student leader at the University of Cambridge or whatever. But the people on the right will say it's too left wing, people on the left say it's too right wing. It sits in the middle. And actually, what you'll find with the BBC is quite vacuous, politically speaking, because the anchors and the reporters generally don't give their opinion. So people think it's the problem with the problem the BBC faces is that it is trying to reflect the social movement. So if you are, it's seen as socially liberal. So you'll have, black people and gay people and this represented more in TV shows, and they try and get like equality in that way. And because that is happening, they say it's politically left wing. But actually, when it comes to politics that are outside of the identity culture thing, it's politically central and quite vacuous, and no one really throws their opinion in. So people go elsewhere to get to sit in their own echo chambers. Now, I could be like the BBC and just report stuff, but it would end up being quite vacuous. I will give you my opinion because I think my opinion is correct, and because we all think our opinion is correct, right? And then the question is, am I trying to change your mind? I don't think I am. Would I be pleased if I change your mind to think the same way I think? I guess I probably would, because I think my way is right, obviously. Otherwise, I wouldn't believe it. We don't sit around going, oh, do you know what I'm going to do today? Believe something's completely wrong. Oh, the moon's made of cheese. Yeah, that's a cool thing to believe. It's completely wrong, but I believe it. Of course, yeah, I could get onto the philosophy of doxastic voluntarism, but I won't. We naturally believe that we are right? And so therefore, you are going to be pleased if you convince someone to your point of view, because you are then helping the world to be more correct in your frame of mind, of way of thinking, etc., etc. So am I trying to change your mind? Not really. It's not my objective here. This is just me splurging stuff out and being quite happy that people are willing to listen to it. But I will colour my analysis with what I believe. Of course I will. And I know that many of you will go, oh my God, I hate it when he does that, because some of you will claim it's because I don't know what I'm talking about. But the reality is it's usually because you just sit at the opposite end of the political spectrum to me. And your way of saying, I hate what you're saying, is to say, you don't know what you're talking about. So I really get that quite often. And then a lot of people sit similarly to me and go, I really like what you're saying because I agree with you and you do know what you're talking about. And I'm saying you know what you're talking about because I agree with you, right? And then you get some people say, I disagree with you, but I like listening to that because I don't normally listen to people I disagree with, because we all sit in our own echo chambers. So it's refreshing to hear a point of view that is different to mine. And so all of these ideas exist in the viewership of this channel. But I don't think I will not do my geopolitical videos on account of that some of you don't like them, because you can turn off and you can not watch them. I have an awful lot of people who tell me they do like them. I've had people tell me that they have changed their political opinions. I've had people reach out to me saying, like, you've enlightened me to a position I never thought I would agree with, and actually I've changed my mind. I've had people reach out to me saying, I've completely changed my mind on Donald Trump as a result of what you have told me. And now I understand the reality of the situation. I've literally had people that have reached out personally to me and said that. So, you know, for every person that tells me to shut up, I don't know what I'm talking about, I have a number of people that say, thank you for saying that, please carry on. I'm not asking for anyone in the threads today to go, oh, please carry on. I'm not angling for any kind of like, you know, nice words or anything like that. Sorry, words are difficult for me today. But I'm just going to say that I get these kinds of comments. This is a decent comment, and thanks John DeVries for laying out that comment in a nice way, even though you don't want me to continue doing my geopolitics video so much. But I get an awful lot of complete trolls that are obviously trolls, especially when you look at them. Here's a hint, by the way. When you click on someone on Twitter and you go to their profile, if their profile has only very few posts where they've literally only ever said like 10 things on Twitter outside of anything else, but if you go to their replies, they've replied like 20,000 times to people, then their whole job is to go on and reply to people and to denigrate what other people say, rather than create content of their own that other people can come and look at. It's all about jumping on what other people say with other Russian trolls to denigrate and to grind them down. So this is a great example of someone just called Jay, very little known about them, posts since they've been on Twitter something like 6 things, but has replied a gazillion times to everyone, and they're all like pro-Russian stuff. So when he tells me to shut up, I don't know what I'm talking about with regard to US politics, I'm like, yeah, you're actually Russian, mate, so you just shut up yourself, mate. Anyway, that's my just little comment on geopolitics and this particular video. I know it's not for everyone, but hopefully it's for someone. And the idea is that you are free to watch or not watch. And by trying to shut me down or say I shouldn't say stuff, if you're one of these people that says, no, I hate censorship, and then says that I shouldn't be saying things, then there could be an issue there. And I know there are many good people out there that vehemently disagree with what I say, because we have our chats on a daily basis. Thanks for being there, guys, all of you, that whole spectrum. I really appreciate it. Toodle pips.